name is Steve Crane. Back in the original locking era, I was known as Sinbad. I started dancing back in 1971. Our group was formed in 1973 and it was called the Ghetto Dancers. The members were Captain Crunch, Cisco Kid, Sinbad, F&M, and Flea Lock. And we performed twice for American Bandstand where we were featured as what were called the Spotlight Dancers. We also performed on The Tonight Show when Steve Allen was a guest host, and we also did various shows throughout the city. We performed with Kool and the Gang at the Total Experience nightclub. We performed for Quincy Jones's, well, as a tribute to Quincy Jones, I should say, which was held at the Shrine Auditorium. And then we got slated to do a birthday party for Quincy Jones at the A&M recording studio. In 1975, we went through some personnel changes where Flea Lock and F&M were no longer part of the group. They left the group, and Skeeter Rabbit became part of the group. And so Skeeter Rabbit was part of the shows that we did throughout the city, and he added a dimension that we didn't have, and that was a robot dancer who could master the robot. Flea Lock was a good robot dancer, but he could do other things, but Skeeter Rabbit added that professional robot element that we were missing on a more mature level. Went to a nightclub called the Citadel in Hollywood. It was a few months before my 15th birthday, and that's when Soul Train had just started coming on television and seeing all these fantastic dancers. So when I was at the Citadel nightclub, I was fascinated with what I saw. I mean, I saw Don Campbell, I saw Campbell Jr., I saw Penguin, I saw this lady that was on Soul Train named Angie, and I saw all these dancers that just really impressed me. And Ricky was pretty good too, but I, at that time, was just beginning. So I kind of, as a student, just stood back, watched, and started practicing. Eventually I got introduced to Campbell Jr. I saw also guys that were really good who were my age, because these guys were a little older. The guys who were a little older than I was, but not much, were the Go-Go Brothers and the Yo-Yo Brothers. And I saw these guys doing these synchronized routines. This is like 1971. And I said, man, I gotta learn this. And so as I started getting into it, it took me a whole year of constant, almost everyday practice, because you had to be around the original dancers to really get the concept. You had to get the foundation. You can't be a black belt until you're a white belt. Well, with this locking dancer, you couldn't be a full-fledged locker until you learned the basic steps. And then once you learned the steps, then you could graduate and put yourself out there where people would respect the art, respect what you were doing. The link between the clubs and the Catholic schools, and it's a very important link, came from some guys that I later met from Verbum Day. They were Skeeter Rabbit, Tony Gogo, Buddy Lombard, Kevin Lombard, and they were part of the groups, the two groups called the Go-Go Brothers and the Yo-Yo Brothers. Well, those guys were old enough where they went to the nightclub and learned from the masters. They were the masters, part of being the masters, but still young enough to go to the Catholic school scene where people wanted to emulate them. And so when I later found this out, I was going to all these various Catholic schools where locking was very, very huge. Regarding the clubs at the time, there was, of course, the Citadel nightclub, which eventually closed down, and the owners, or I shouldn't say the owners, the people who were running it, opened up a club called the Summit on the Hill. And then there was also Maverick's Flat, which existed for years and still exists. But those were the three primary clubs where most of the dancers would congregate. Now at these clubs, these were the clubs that featured the varsity of dancers. This is where your top dancers performed. Other dancers would come and they would look, and they might go to smaller clubs or even to the high schools and try to emulate. But they didn't have the courage because they knew they didn't have the skill to format themselves at these particular clubs. Again, the varsity. So yes, there were many other dancers who would come. Maybe they would look around and peek and try to pick up steps, but they wouldn't get on the floor with what I call the big boys, because they would have gotten embarrassed. And so, yes, there were plenty of dancers, no doubt about that. And some would try their hand at getting on the dance floor, but for the most part, they were there to spy.